The day may not be far when we will borrow the words of Thomas Jefferson and speak of the will of the South African nation. In the exercise of that will, by this united nation of black and white people, it must surely be that there will be born a country on the southern tip of Africa, which you will be proud to call a friend and an ally, because of its contribution to the universal striving towards liberty, human rights, prosperity, and peace among the peoples. Let that day come now. Let us keep our arms locked together so that we form a solid phalanx against racism to ensure that that day comes now. By our common actions, let us ensure that justice triumphs without delay. When that has come to pass, then shall we all be entitled to acknowledge the salute when others say of us, "Blessed are the peacemakers." It would have been immoral to keep quiet while a racist tyranny sought to reduce an entire people into a status worse than that of the beasts of the forest. It would have been an act of treason against the people and against our conscience to allow fear and the drive towards self-preservation to dominate our behavior, obliging us to absent ourselves from the struggle for democracy and human rights, not only in our country, but throughout the world. We could not have made an acquaintance through literature with human giants such as George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, and Thomas Jefferson, and not been moved to act as they were moved to act.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I hope you're doing fine where you are, and if you ain't doing fine, please do fine where you are. It's good to be fine, and it's never so good not to be so fine. Yes, remember, there is some people, or you yourself, I don't know who you are, but I know some of my subscribers. So probably I know who you are. You know, when we ask two people about you, they'll give different perspectives about you. There are some people who are good in place A, they are bad in place B. Depending on who you ask, these people will always be two different people to two different minds. And you will be surprised how many versions of people, or rather how many versions of yourself people have in their minds. Yeah? This is because we have what is called the objectivity and the subjectivity. The objective morality and the subjective morality. Something might be good in one nation, something might be bad in one nation. A person can be good in one place, that same person is cursed in another place. But there's a character that defies all these. There's a character that is loved by everyone. There's a character that is, he shares it all with everyone. We all know him as a good person, a person who brought change to his country, a person who suffered for very many years for his values that he had. He did not sacrifice his values, because him sacrificing his values would mean the greater harm would really suffer. I'm speaking about Nelson Mandela, as you have already judged. Nelson Mandela, if you ask anyone around the world, he is good. He is really good for the fight he took. This specific gentleman was jailed in a place called Robben Island. Robben Island is a small island off the coast of South Africa, because in South Africa we have two oceans meeting. Such a fantastic place. We have an ocean in Durban, which is the Indian Ocean, while in Cape Town we have the Atlantic Ocean. So we have these two oceans meeting. Such a fantastic place. So I think the Robben Island was somewhere in the islands of, or rather on the waters of the Atlantic. And here is where Nelson Mandela was jailed for so very many years. You know, Nelson Mandela was a person who was fighting against apartheid. He was fighting for the freedom of the black person. This black person, as he was fighting for himself. Nelson Mandela was presented with many opportunities to help him not live in Robben Island, or rather not be jailed, not living but jailed for 32 years. You know, 32 years is not a short time. Like, he spent good amount of his life, almost half of his life, maybe a third of his life, being jailed for the sake of others. We don't have so many people who will do that. In today's Africa, no African leader, almost none, will do the same. Everyone is greedy. Everyone wants to have the whole cake for himself. Nobody wants to leave a cake for the others. Nelson Mandela carried it all. He carried all the burdens. He carried the people of South Africa in his heart, you know. Nelson Mandela also had his values. What follows is that by the time Nelson Mandela was being released, we had the president Frederick de Klerk. Frederick de Klerk was the last white president he was not really like the rest of those other people who came before him. Frederick de Klerk made amendments that allowed Nelson Mandela be released from jail, because Nelson Mandela was working underground. Before he was jailed, he was working underground with spreading news about liberations, strikes, peaceful strikes. Nelson Mandela was a peaceful man. He was organizing strikes, you know. He was organizing boycotts. He was organizing all these, and that which he was doing, there's a certain kind of newspaper he was having, or rather, he was spreading his ideas. The paper was called the Black Pimpernel, you know. It was being spread by Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela. Rolihlahla is his name. Mandela, I think, is his father's name. Yeah, he was born from a Sourh family. Was married to his wife Winnie, whom they later broke up. You know, later he was married to the first lady of Mozambique. I don't know what happened after that. I didn't want to follow up. I just wanted to focus on his good side, because this man is good for so very many reasons. And now I want us to watch this video, get to understand why Nelson Mandela was very much loved, and what it is, or rather how it was, to be like Nelson Mandela, and why did the people of his time and this time we still love him. Even though he's gone, we still love Nelson Mandela. Why did we love him so much? Or rather, why did the people love him so much? Why is it that if you ask anyone, they speak almost the same person, a single person, not like us, me and you, whom people have different perspectives of? Yeah. Now let's dive into this video.
Where those who are entitled by law to carry arms as the forces of national security and law and order will not turn their weapons against the citizens simply because the citizens assert that equality, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness are fundamental human rights which are not only inalienable but must, if necessary, be defended with the weapons of war. We fight for and visualize a future in which all shall, without regard to race, color, creed, or sex, have the right to vote and to be voted into all elective organs of state. we are engaged in struggle to ensure that the rights of every individual are guaranteed and protected through a democratic constitution, the rule of law, an entrenched Bill of Rights, which should be enforced by an independent judiciary, as well as a multi-party political system. Mr. Speaker, we are acutely conscious of the fact that we are addressing an historic institution for whose creation and integrity many men and women lost their lives in the War of Independence, the Civil War, and the war against Nazism and fascism. That very history demands that we address you with respect and candor and without any attempt to dissemble. What we have said concerning the political arrangements we seek for our country is seriously meant. It is an outcome for which many of us went to prison, for which many have died in police cells, on the gallows, in our towns and villages, and in the countries of Southern Africa. Indeed, we have even had our political representatives killed in countries as far away from South Africa as France. Unhappily, our people continue to die to this day, victims of armed agents of the state who are still determined to turn their guns against the very idea of a non-racial democracy. But this is the perspective which we trust Congress will feel happy to support and encourage, using the enormous weight of its prestige and authority as an eminent representative of democratic practice. To deny any person their human rights is to challenge their very humanity. To impose on them a wretched life of hunger and deprivation is to dehumanize them. But such has been the terrible fate of all black persons in our country under the system of apartheid. The extent of the deprivation of millions of people has to be seen to be believed. The injury is made that more intolerable by the opulence of our white compatriots and the deliberate distortion of the economy to feed that opulence. The process of the reconstruction of South African society must and will also entail the transformation of its economy. We need a strong and growing economy. We require an economy that is able to address the needs of all the people of our country, that can provide food, houses, education, health services, social security, and everything that makes human life human, that makes life joyful and not a protracted encounter with hopelessness and despair. We believe that the fact of the apartheid structure of the South African economy and the enormous and pressing needs of the people make it inevitable that the democratic government will intervene in this economy, acting through the elected parliament. we have put the matter to the business community of our country that the need for a public sector is one of the elements in a many-sided strategy of economic development and restructuring that has to be considered by us all, including the private sector. The ANC holds no ideological positions which dictate that it must adopt a policy of nationalization. But the ANC also holds the view that there is no self-regulating mechanism within the South African economy which will, on its own, ensure growth with equity. At the same time, we take it as given that the private sector is an engine of growth and development, which is critical to the success of the mixed economy we hope to see in the future South Africa. We are accordingly committed to the creation of the situation in which business people, both South African and foreign, have confidence in the security of their investments, are assured of a fair rate of return on their capital, and do business in conditions of stability and peace. We must also make the point very firmly that the political settlement and democracy itself cannot survive unless the material needs of the people, the bread and butter issues, are addressed as part of the process of change and as a matter of urgency. It should never be that the anger of the poor should be the finger of accusation pointed at all of us because we fail to respond to the crisis of the people for food, to the cries of the people for food, for shelter, for the dignity of the individual. We shall need your support to achieve the post-apartheid economic objectives, which are an intrinsic part of the process of the restoration of the human rights of the people of South Africa. We would like to approach the issue of our economic cooperation not as a relationship between donor and recipient, between a dependent and a benefactor. We would like to believe that there is a way in which we could structure this relationship so that we do indeed benefit from your enormous resources in terms of your capital, technology, all-round expertise, your enterprising spirit, and your markets. This relationship should, however, be one from which your people should also derive benefit, so that we who are fighting to liberate the very spirit of our entire people from the bondage of the arrogance of the ideology and practice of white supremacy, do not build a relationship of subservient dependency and fawning gratitude. One of the benefits that should accrue to both our peoples and to the rest of the world should surely be that this complex South African society, which has known nothing but racism for 3 centuries, should be transformed into an oasis of good race relations, where the black shall to the white be sister and brother, a fellow South African, and equal human being, both citizens of the world. To destroy racism in the world, we together must expunge apartheid racism in South Africa. Justice and liberty must be our tool. Prosperity and happiness, our weapon. Mr. Speaker, distinguished representatives of the American people, you know this more than we do, that peace is its own reward. Our own fate, born by a succession of generations that reach backwards into centuries, has been nothing but tension, conflict, and death. In a sense, we do not know the meaning of peace except in the imagination. But because we have not known true peace in its real meaning, because for centuries, generations have had to bury the victims of state violence, we have fought for the right to experience peace. On the initiative of the ANC, the process towards the conclusion of a peaceful settlement has started. According to a logic dictated by our situation, we are engaged in an effort which includes the removal of obstacles to negotiations. This will be followed by a negotiated determination of the mechanism which will draw up the new constitution. This should lead to the formation of this constitution-making institution, and therefore the elaboration and adoption of a democratic constitution. Elections would then be held on the basis of this constitution, and for the first time, South Africa would have a body of lawmakers which would, like yourselves, be mandated by the whole people. Despite the admitted commitment of President de Klerk to walk this road with us, and despite our acceptance of his integrity and honesty of his purposes, we would be fools to believe that the road ahead of us is without major hurdles. Too many among our white compatriots are steeped in the ideology of racism to admit easily that change must come. Tragedy may yet sully the future we pray and work for if these slaves of the past take up arms in a desperate effort to resist the process which must lead to the democratic transformation of our country. For those who care to worry about violence in our country, as we do, it is at these forces that they should focus their attention, a process in which we are engaged. We must contend still with the reality that South Africa is a country in the grip of the apartheid crime against humanity. The consequences of this continue to be felt not only within our borders, but throughout Southern Africa, which continues to harvest the bitter fruits of conflict and war, especially in Mozambique and Angola. Peace will not come to our country and region until the apartheid system is ended. Therefore, we say we still have a struggle on our hands. Our common and noble efforts to abolish the system of white minority domination must continue. We are encouraged and strengthened by the fact of the agreement between ourselves, this Congress, as well as President Bush and his administration, that sanctions should remain in place. Sanctions should remain in place because the purpose for which they were imposed has not yet been achieved. We have yet to arrive at the point when we can say that South Africa is set on an irreversible course leading to its transformation into a united, a democratic, and non-racial country. We plead that you cede the prerogative to the people of South Africa to determine the moment when it will be said that profound changes have occurred and an irreversible process achieved, enabling you and the rest of the international community to lift sanctions. We would like to take this opportunity to thank you all for the principled struggle you waged, which resulted in the adoption of the historic Comprehensive Anti-Apartheid Act, which made such a decisive contribution to the process of moving our country forward towards negotiations. We request that you go further and assist us with the material resources which will enable us to promote the peace process and meet other needs which arise from the changing situation you have helped to bring about. The stand you took established the understanding among the millions of our people that here we have friends. Here we have fighters against racism who feel hurt because we are hurt, who seek our success because they too seek the victory of democracy over tyranny. And here I speak not only about you, members of the United States Congress, but also of the millions of people throughout this great land who stood up and engaged the apartheid system in struggle. The masses who have given us such strength and joy by the manner in which they have received us since we arrived in this country. Mr. Speaker, Mr. President, as senators and representatives, we went to jail because it was impossible to sit still while the obscenity of the apartheid system was being imposed on our people. We could not have heard of and admired John Brown, Sojourner Truth, Frederick Douglass, W.E.B. Du Bois, Marcus Garvey, Martin Luther King Jr., and others. We could not have heard of these and not be moved to act as they were moved to act. We could not have known of your Declaration of Independence and not elected to join in the struggle to guarantee the people's life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Grateful to you all that you persisted in your resolve to have us and other political prisoners released from jail. You have given us the gift and privilege to rejoin our people, yourselves, and the rest of the international community in the common effort to transform South Africa into a united, a democratic, and non-racial country. You have given us the power to join hands with all people of conscience to fight for the victory of democracy and human rights throughout the world. We are glad that you merged with our own people to make it possible for us to emerge from the darkness of the prison cell and join the contemporary process of the renewal of the world. We thank you most sincerely for all you have done and count on you to persist in your noble endeavors to free the rest of our political prisoners and to emancipate our people from the larger prison that is apartheid South Africa.
So, from watching this video, we can clearly tell that Nelson Mandela was a man who stood by his words. Nelson Mandela was a man who really, we have a few of them, you know. We have people in history who've gone down to be remembered by Nelson Mandela. Unfortunately, some of these people who are like Nelson Mandela were either assassinated or rather they were taken down by their very own people. For example, the Ghanaian president, Kwame Nkrumah. Kwame Nkrumah was overthrown by the very government he was defending. We have people like the president of Cuba back then, Fidel Castro. There was some essence of inside job. There was some insights that was being presented by the inside job, because the US had planted some mole in his government, and his own people took part. We can say his own people took part in bringing him down. With Nelson Mandela, it didn't happen that way, but I surely know there was some attempts, because this is our nature as Africans, So I really think it will be wise for us to have a brief history. Let's learn about Nelson Mandela. What motivated him to provide such important speeches, and why is it that people love him so much? Here is some history that you most likely didn't know. We're gonna start with the life and the birth of Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela. Here it is. Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela was born in July 18th, 1918. July 18th, 1918, in the small village of Mvezo in the Eastern Cape province of South Africa. He belonged to the Thembu royal family, and his birth name, Rolihlahla, translates to pulling the branch of a tree, or colloquially, troublemaker, of which he was, Nelson Mandela Rolihlahla, troublemaker. His father, Gadla Henry Mfakasanyiwa, was a local chief and a councillor to the Thembu royal family. Mandela's early life was shaped by traditional Xhosa customs and stories about the struggles of his people. He grew up in that setup of education, in that setup of politics, in that setup of leadership. We have politics, then we have leadership. Now he grew up in both, and he also had a proper education. His father laid that foundation for him. And sometimes names carry meaning. Names carry essence. Words do not just exist in a vacuum. They carry with them essence, meaning, and importance. You understand? For Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela, it was his father who planned this. He was taught his struggles, which reminds me about Moses in the Bible, where he was picked by the princess of Egypt, and he was brought up in a palace. He grew up and he understood politics. He also understood leadership. Until then, God used him to lead his people, and it is the same Moses who wrote the most legendary thing I know, the 10 Commandments. We live by these 10 Commandments, and God chose him to bring down these 10 Commandments. He was brought up with that setup. He was brought up to be a leader. So bringing up is also an important factor, Now, after Nelson Mandela's father died, that was when he was 9 years old. He was taken under the guardianship of Jongintaba Dalindibueyo. The acting regent of the Thembu people. This move exposed Mandela to the broader political landscape and instilled in him the importance of leadership. He attended mission schools and later enrolled at Fort Hare University, where he began to develop an interest in politics. Now, you know that Nelson Mandela is one of the key founders of the African National Congress, the ANC. The ANC that was there during Nelson Mandela's time is not the ANC that exists today. South Africans are complaining about this ANC squandering their money, Jacob Zuma, Cyril Ramaphosa, so and so. But we've had a good president in the past. We've had Thabo Mbeki. I loved Thabo Mbeki. And Thabo Mbeki is one of those presidents, or rather, back then he wasn't a president. He was one of those people who would work together with Nelson Mandela to bring liberty. We had people like Stephen Biko. We had people like the clergyman, Desmond Tutu, who came up with the idea, who coined the term rather, or made it popular. If you watch something being done evil and you do nothing to it to stop the evil, you are evil as well. That is a saying from Desmond Tutu. Yeah. So what was the motivation behind the creation of the African National Congress movement? Now here it is. Mandela moved to Johannesburg in 1941, escaping an arranged marriage planned by Jongin Taba. Ha! In Johannesburg, he worked as a mine security officer and later as a law clerk. He enrolled at the University of Witwatersrand to study law, where he encountered students of diverse racial and cultural backgrounds, further broadening his perspectives on social justice. So he also studied in Witwatersrand Law. He also studied at Fort Hare University. His political journey began in earnest when he joined the African National Congress in 1943. Mandela co-founded the ANC Youth League in 1944, advocating for a more radical approach to achieving equal rights for black South Africans. He was deeply motivated by the systemic racial discrimination and economic inequality entrenched by the apartheid regime, a system of institutionalized racial segregation enforced by the white minority government from 1948. You know, so he saw the suffering of these people and how these colonizers came and they were the few but they were controlling the majority. Same like what Moses saw. The Egyptians were whipping so bad his people, and he felt something in his heart. He had to strike this Egyptian down for him to run away, and this created the setup, or rather this created the circumstances for him to lead the Exodus, the famous Exodus. Yeah. Now, later you know that Nelson Mandela was arrested, right? We have something about Robben Island, something which is very much significant to the life of Nelson Mandela. This was meant to be his breaking point, but it never became his breaking point. Nelson Mandela was a stoic man, was a man who believed stoicism. It is said that Nelson Mandela, while he was in Robben Islands, he studied Marcus Aurelius, a very nice, another one also, nice Roman general. Nelson Mandela studied Stoicism, which was written by Marcus Aurelius, one of the best Roman leaders or Roman empires that Rome ever had, you know. Now, Mandela's activism made him a target of the apartheid regime. After initially advocating for non-violent resistance, Mandela co-founded Umhutoto Wesizwe, which translates to the Spear of the Nation, in 1961. The armed wing of the ANC. As a response to increasing government repression, he was arrested in 1962 and sentenced to 5 years in prison for inciting workers' strikes and leaving the country without a passport. You know, they were finding all reasons they could to put him under their hands. In 1964, Mandela and other leaders were tried in infamous Rivonia trial, where they faced charges of sabotage and conspiracy to overthrow the government. Convicted, Mandela was sentenced to life imprisonment and sent to Robben Island, a maximum security prison off the coast of Cape Town. Mandela spent 18 of his 27 years in Robben Island, enduring harsh conditions, physical labor, and limited contact with the outside world. Despite the isolation, he became a symbol of resistance and a source of inspiration for anti-apartheid activists. He continued to study law and communicate with his comrades, maintaining his belief in reconciliation and racial democracy. He spent 18 years of his 27 years in Robben Island with harsh punishment, working, digging. Nobody wants you to contact the rest of the world, your family and all that. This was harsh. This was meant to be a breaking point. Life imprisonment which never came to happen. I love Nelson Mandela for the values he stood for. That is one thing I love for this African leader. Now, the release and his presidency. Mandela was released from prison on February 11, 1990, after intense domestic and international pressure on the apartheid government. His release marked a turning point in South Africa's history. Mandela immediately began working to negotiate an end to apartheid, collaborating with the then president, Frederick de Klerk. Their efforts culminated in South Africa's first multiracial election in 1994, where Mandela was elected as the country's first black president. As a president, Mandela prioritized reconciliation. He prioritized nation building and the establishment of the new constitution. He sought to heal the divisions of the past through initiatives such as the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which addressed human rights abuses and apartheid. These guys are really a good piece of history, you know. So why did we love him? Why did we love Nelson Mandela? Remember, by the beginning of the video, I told you, you as an individual, you have different versions of people in your head, and you will be surprised by those versions. For Mandela, we only have one, a man who suffered, struggled, and later became the president. What a beautiful history. What a beautiful life. Now, Nelson Mandela is universally admired for his resilience, humility, and commitment to justice and equality. Several factors contribute to this global legacy. First of all, Mandela had forgiveness and reconciliation. He worked for this. Despite spending 27 years in prison, Mandela chose to forgive his oppressors and worked to unite a deeply divided nation. His leadership embodied compassion and reconciliation over vengeance. Another one is commitment to justice. Mandela's unwavering fight for equal rights and his belief in the dignity of every individual made him a global icon for human rights. The third one is humble leadership. Even as a president, Mandela lived modestly and demonstrated humility, even focusing on the collective good rather than personal gain. We have the global influence. Mandela became a symbol of resistance against oppression worldwide, inspiring movements for social justice and democracy across the globe. He is also remembered for the legacy of peace. Mandela's dedication to peaceful coexistence and dialogue, even in the face of extreme adversity, has left an enduring impact on South Africa and the world. Nelson Mandela passed away sadly on December 5th, 2013, at the age of 95. Wow, God allowed him to live up to 95. Yeah, thank you, God. Thank you for allowing Mandela to see this far. I personally loved Nelson Mandela, and I cried when I heard that he died. Even though I didn't know him personally, I knew about this because we were taught about him. Everywhere in Africa, we are taught about Nelson Mandela. Yes. This is how much influential he was. His life and legacy continue to inspire millions like me. And he remains a symbol of the triumph of the human spirit over injustice. This is the life of Nelson Mandela. Can you ask yourself one question? What is it you can do to change the life of people around you? What is it that which you can do? Doesn't matter how big, doesn't matter how small. Just do something to change the life of people around you. That is what really counts in the end. Doesn't matter how much big cars you drove, how much cash you had. Just with that small thing, you don't know how many hearts it will touch. You know, we don't live to be remembered by how much we owned, how political we are, which country we led as president. We live to be remembered by the actions we did to impact other lives. For Nelson Mandela, it was to show that injustice can be beaten. And I love this. This is one of those best videos I do compassionately. Yeah. Compassionately speaking, if you like what I do, subscribe to the channel. I shall so much appreciate. And see you in the next one.